A new 85mm lens for full frame at f1.4 that costs less than $500? Interesting. Hello everyone, what's going on? My name's Josh and welcome to the channel. Today we'll be reviewing the new Sirui camera lens, the Sirui Aurora 85mm f1.4 prime lens for full frame mirrorless cameras in the E mount, X mount, and Z mount. Now if you've ever heard the name Sirui before, you might be thinking, oh, the monopod company or the camera accessory company, because that's exactly what I was thinking, but no, this is a camera lens made by Sirui. It's their first full frame autofocus camera lens, and in this video we're gonna see how they did and if they made a lens that is worth your money. For full disclosure, Sirui sent me this lens to review. They did not pay me to review this lens. That being said, they did send me this lens without a return label, so I'm making the assumption that I get to keep this lens. So keep that in mind when you watch this review. This lens does say sample on the corner, so I don't think it's exactly fit for resale. However, I have been told that it represents the final product, what will be shipping to consumers. When reviewing this lens, I'm going to primarily be comparing it to the lens that I own in this category, which is the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master Mark I. However, I will be making passing comparisons as well to the Sony 85mm f1.8, which is a super common, really well-rounded entry-level portrait lens for the E-mount system, the system that I shoot on. And then I'll also make passing comparisons to the G Master Mark II lens, which came out just a number of months ago. So we'll try and get kind of a full comparison to all of the E-mount lenses that are available for portrait lenses at this time. So personally speaking, I'm expecting the Sirui lens to land somewhere maybe in between the Sony entry-level 85mm 1.8 and the G Master lens in terms of performance. But honestly, I hope it's really good because having a portrait lens, an f1.4 portrait lens for less than $500 on any system is going to be a great value if it's a good lens. First, I'll just talk briefly about the packaging of the Sirui Aurora lens. The box is made from a reinforced cardboard with a gift box style construction. There's a fabric pull tab on the top, and then inside the box, we are provided with a case for our lens, which is a nice addition given that the budget price point of this lens. You wouldn't necessarily expect a lot of accessories. The case itself has a moderate amount of padding and utility. I would say it's very similar to the cases provided by the Sony G Master lenses, and on the low end, like the 85mm f1.8, those lenses don't even come with cases. So it's nice to see. It's a nice add-on. We also get some documentation for the lens and our standard warranty information. There's also a promotion going on right now where Sirui will send you 2 filters with the purchase of this lens. I'm not sure how long that promotion goes on for, but it could be factored into the cost of this lens if you're also looking to pick up filters. Sirui sent me a clear UV filter and a mist filter with my lens. So again, if you're looking to pick up filters, maybe weigh that with your purchasing decision. All right, so let's talk about the specs of the Sirui Aurora 85mm f1.4 lens. This is an 85mm portrait lens that you can buy for E-mount, X mount, and Z mount mirrorless camera systems. And this lens weighs 540 grams. That is heavier than the Sony 85mm f1.8 lens, which is only 371 grams. However, the Sirui Aurora lens is actually 280 grams lighter than the original Sony G Master 85mm f1.4 lens. The Sirui is also lighter than the G Master Mark II 85mm lens. That lens weighs 642 grams, so the Sirui lens is functionally about 100 grams lighter than even the best of the best from Sony. The Sirui lens is also shorter and smaller than both of the G Master lenses. The G Master 85mm f1.4 Mark I is 4.3 inches tall, and the Mark II is 4.2 inches tall. The Sirui is only 4 inches tall, so you get a little bit of a height decrease. Now, it's not as small as the 85 f1.8, which is 3¼ inches tall, but the Sirui lens does strike a pretty good balance of being smaller than the G Master lenses while having a similar f-stop, or having the same f-stop value in f1.4. Moving on to the filter thread, we can see that the barrel diameter of this lens compared to the original G Master lens is also a lot smaller. The Sirui lens has a 67mm exterior filter thread, which is the exact same as the Sony 85mm f1.8. Both of the G Master lenses have 77mm filter threads, meaning that the G Master lenses, in addition to being heavier and longer, are also thicker in diameter than the Sirui lens. So overall, the Sirui lens is actually quite a bit smaller than these G Master lenses, which is great for, well, it's just great to have a smaller lens. Overall, I think the Sirui lens strikes a nice balance in size because it fits right in between the G Master lenses and Sony's 85mm f1.8 first-party lens. Next, let's talk about the handling and the features of the Sirui lens. So it's an 85mm portrait lens that goes all the way open to 1.4. It's common for portrait lenses that go all the way open to 1.4 to only go as closed as f16, and the Sirui is exactly the same as the G Masters. They go from f1.4 to f16. Now the Sony 85mm f1.8 goes all the way down to f22. So if you need that, you really only have one option. But the aperture in this goes from f1.4 to f16 electronically, meaning that you have to have the lens connected to a compatible camera in order to change the aperture. That is pretty standard fare. The body itself of the lens is made from black magnesium alloy, and inside the lens, there's a 15-bladed iris, which is actually 4 more blades than in both of the G Master lenses from Sony, and 6 more blades than that 85mm f1.8 from Sony. Now, in theory, this will give you a more rounded spherical bokeh, but we're gonna have to see how it looks in the tests. On the body of the lens, we have a manual focus ring and a manual aperture control ring. Both of these rings are made of plastic. They're not made of rubber like on some of the other lenses, like the G Master. On the body of the lens, we have a switch that allows you to change the aperture control ring from clicked to clickless, essentially video and photo mode. On the other side of the lens, we have an autofocus to manual focus switch, pretty standard fare, and an autofocus hold button, which is also very helpful. That's it for switches on this lens. There's some writing on the barrel of the lens. We see the specs, which are indented, and they're brought out with white paint. And then we see we have the brand named Aurora full frame on the top of the lens barrel. We also have a brand tag. This one's kind of a chromatic blue color that says Sirui. It's giving G Master vibes because G Master does a very similar thing with the G on the side of their lens. And I think it looks pretty cool. Other than that, the lens comes with your standard front and rear caps. On the back cap, there's actually a little text on the bottom that says which way you turn it to screw it on and take it off, and I think that is helpful, especially in an entry-level lens. The hood of the lens, which we'll just look at here, is pretty standard fare. It's one-piece plastic construction with an actual rubber ring along the bottom, which helps you take it off, put it on. Very similar to all the other lenses in this category. I don't see any issue with the hood. Now we get into one of the more interesting features of the Sirui lens, which is, well, we'll take off the back cap to reveal what is that. It's a USB-C port inside the E-mount of the lens. And that has to be one of the most interesting connectivity features that I've ever seen in a camera lens. So the purpose is to plug in your lens from this area and to update the firmware when new firmware comes. I don't necessarily like that the back of the lens is exposed during the updated process or the updating process. I think it's fine, I guess. I mean, if you're not in a dusty environment. I don't see any issues with the port being placed in this location necessarily because it is inside the weather sealing gasket that runs along the back of the lens. However, it is, well, it's a strange sight to behold. I think your mileage might vary, but I don't see any reason why this wouldn't be a good idea. I don't think. So how does the Sirui Aurora 85mm f1.4 perform? Well, I ran it through a series of tests alongside my original G Master lens. The testing camera was a Sony FX3, and I made sure to have all lens distortion corrections in the camera turned off for the tests. Let's see how it did. So the first test was a close focus test. I placed a deck of cards in front of the camera and then put the lens as close as I could get while still in focus. The Sirui Aurora lens has a minimum focus distance of 33.5 inches, which is good, albeit slightly worse than all of the other 85mm portrait lenses from Sony. They all have a 31.5 inch minimum focus distance, which is, well, it's slightly better. But in practice, this distance doesn't really make that big of a deal because 85mm portrait lenses are not known for their close focusing performance. I mean, objectively, it's a very small distance. And I'm not gonna ding the Sirui lens because it's 1.5 or 2 inches off of the minimum focus distance of the other ones. I think it's pretty much a wash when it compares to all of these lenses for close focus. Let's move on to focus breathing. So for the focus breathing test, I ran through the entire focus ring of the lens manually with focus breathing compensation turned off for the G Master lens. And in this test, we see that the Sirui lens has significant focus breathing, which is not to be surprising because, again, portrait lenses in this category are kind of known for their focus breathing. And that's evident by the G Master also exhibiting significant focus breathing, albeit slightly less than the Sirui. So I will say that they likely did include some effort to control the focus breathing. However, it's obvious it was not the main priority when designing this lens. There is focus breathing. The big thing to consider is that if focus breathing is an issue for you, then some Sony lenses like the G Masters do allow for focus breathing compensation to be baked in camera, which can help you eliminate focus breathing for certain Sony lenses. If that's an issue for you, then I would go with one of the G Masters off the bat. This lens would be out of contention. But I think the focus breathing that it exhibits is not egregious and is acceptable in a lens of this price bracket and focal length. Next, we're going to test the autofocus speed of the Sirui Aurora lens. For this test, I used the touch tracking on the back of the camera to switch between a subject in the foreground and a subject in the background. Now, I'll start with the G Master. The G Master 85mm f1.4 was never known to be an excellent autofocusing lens. In fact, it's one of the worst autofocusing lenses in the entire G Master system because of how old it is and the older technology that's baked into the lens. However, throughout the years, updates to this lens have kept it relatively snappy and reliable. Here is an example of the G Master lens autofocusing as fast as it can. It is fine. It's not a great performer, but it is relatively accurate and acceptable for what it is. Now we switch to the Sirui lens, and the Sirui lens is actually faster, which is great to see. It's not exceedingly faster, but I would say new motor technology and the less, the less amount of glass in this unit probably contribute to it being a faster autofocus performer. It's also quieter than the G Master version 1. That lens was kind of known to be a bit noisy, but it's relatively quiet when it focuses, which I like to see. From memory, it's about as fast and as quiet to use as the original Sony 85mm f1.8, which is a great little versatile portrait lens. So I'm very happy with the way that this autofocus performs in this lens. Now for our autofocus performance test. For this test, I sat in front of the Sirui Aurora and I turned eye tracking on in the camera and I set the performance to maximum. And then I tested how well the lens tracked my eyes as I moved around the frame and moved in and out of frame just to see how it would do. And I would say it did a perfectly acceptable job. The lens was never on the bleeding end of autofocus performance. It lagged behind just a little bit, but it always caught up. It was never really a concern, and I think it would be great for moving portrait work or video interview work. And most importantly, this lens never hunted and tried to guess kind of where I would be by shooting a little farther or a little closer. That can be annoying because it can cause kind of pulsating in your image. I never saw any of that. This lens did a great job for what it is at autofocusing on a continuously moving target. The next test we did was the sharpness and the color test. And for this test, I pointed the camera at a color checker video chart and took a photo with the Sirui Aurora and the Sony G Master lens to compare them. And my initial response was, wow, look at all the extra light we're getting from the Sirui instead of from the G Master. Despite them both being at f2.8 for this test, which I did to kind of get the whole chart in focus, the Sirui does a much better job at letting light transmit into the sensor, where the G Master version 1 has much worse vignetting and it's just darker overall in the image. So the Sirui did a great job in letting the light into the sensor. The second thing I want you to look at is not a positive. It's how much warmer the Sirui is compared to the G Master. The G Master is quite neutral. We set the white balance to a standard figure for this test. The G Master was quite neutral. The Sirui was, I will say, warmer. Maybe not significantly warmer, but definitely warmer across the entire frame. So that is something to consider. When we punch in, we can see that the sharpness between the two lenses is very comparable. I would probably just call it a tie. Both of them are sharp at the relative middle area of the frame, which is where I tested. And then the last thing I want to point out is the Sirui lens does not control chromatic aberration nearly as well as this G Master lens does. The G Master image has little to no chromatic aberration around the white areas of the text where they mix in with the dark, and the Sirui does. We see two different colors. We see green, we see purple, chromatic aberration. While this isn't a deal breaker, combining that with the already warmer image of my sample lens could make for a lens that isn't as color accurate when compared to the G Master, really any lens. I know when you buy a $500 lens, you're not expecting pure color accuracy, and for that I would say the Sirui performed pretty competently, but it is something to consider that you might get a more stylized look out of a budget lens like this. However, the look was very good still very accurate. We're talking a very small margin of inconsistency with this lens, and I'm keen to move on to the next test. The next test was the bokeh test, and for this test I hung up a series of string lights and then took a picture of the bokeh created from both lenses in the same spot. So just to be clear, I'm not a bokeh expert. It's largely subjective. I don't know how to break this stuff down for you, but the balls of bokeh appeared very similar across both lenses. From what I can see, the G Master may have slightly more onion-looking bokeh at the corners. I think the images, objectively for me, are very similar, and I have no issue with the way the Sirui lens renders bokeh. So I think it did pretty well in this test. Next, we're testing for flares. So for this test, I sat down in front of both of the lenses and I shined a pen light down the barrel of the lenses from different perspectives, trying to get ghosting and flares to happen. And this is what the result was. I was actually surprised. We'll go back to the G Master. I was actually surprised with the performance of the G Master on this test. I know the G Masters are known for their great optical quality. However, I thought that because the age of this lens is 10 years, I thought it wouldn't necessarily have as good of coatings to reject ghosting and flares, but the G Master did a really good job rejecting flares and particularly ghosting in this test. The Sirui also did a good job, albeit less so than the G Master. It rejected flares and ghosting around the edges of the frame quite well, but when the pen light moved closer to the center of the frame, I was able to find some spots where I could create some significant ghosting and color fringing, maybe a lack of contrast around the middle of the frame. Still very well controlled for a lens of this price point. However, you're not getting the G Master spec coatings, and I think you probably know that, but it is slightly worse performing optically than the G Master in this test. So let's get to the final thoughts. My final thoughts on the Sirui Aurora 85mm f1.4 lens is that Sirui made a very interesting portrait lens for mirrorless cameras, and of course the E-mount, which is what we tested on. It's got a few quirks. I think you know that, like the USB-C port inside the mount and the slightly less performant optics when compared to the G Master. But it's a great value, especially at $499 USD. My advice would be that if you're looking for a high performance 85mm portrait lens for E-mount, and you can swing the budget, obviously you go to the G Master Mark II. I think you'll be very happy. This has in no way dethroned that lens. However, if you're on a budget and you're looking for a portrait lens, I would consider two lenses. I would consider the Sirui Aurora 85mm f1.4, and I would consider, I know I don't have it here, but I would consider the Sony 85mm f1.8, as it's a tried and true, it's one of the best entry-level portrait lenses on the Sony system. Now, how I would choose between those lenses is I would say that if you needed f1.4, go with the Sirui. It's clearly 90% of the way to the G Master. It's really good. It's pretty much there, and it offers f1.4 in a small package for very little money. Very similarly priced is that Sony 85mm f1.8. I would say if you don't want to deal with some of the small quirks of the Sirui and you want to have a first-party lens for Sony, the 85mm f1.8 is a great lens and will not disappoint, especially at a very similar price. And of course, I think we can agree, just don't buy the GM version 1 because it's quite outdated. Unless you're getting a killer deal, just pass on the GM version 1. Not a lens I particularly enjoy. Overall, I think Sirui has developed an excellent portrait lens for the E-mount system, for mirrorless systems, that offers a great value, an f1.4 portrait lens for under $500. I wish this existed when I got into Sony E-mount lenses. This would have been one of the first lenses that I purchased. And extra kudos to Sirui for this being their first lens, an actual recommendable, reviewable, well-performing lens in the budget category. I think that's to be commended. I wish we saw more products like this, especially from brands entering the space for the first time. And that about wraps it up for me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you very much. If you have any questions about the Sirui Aurora lens, drop them in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you and respond to them in a timely manner. Other than that, I'll link some videos above my head to some... Other than that, I'll put some links above my head to some videos that I think you'll enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.